Life has an unbreakable rule. Love must be expressed, just as hunger must be satisfied. Ken, too, found himself in this predicament, his stomach rumbling defiantly, and with no one home to cook, he had to venture out to the convenience store. But who could have predicted that he would stumble into a robbery? As he contemplated running away, he noticed those in need of help. Ken couldn't just stand by, he had to be the hero. But his opponent wielded a weapon, and the consequence was a gaping wound in his own belly. Thus, blood began to flow. The young girls he saved wailed in fear for his safety. Eventually, what was meant to happen came to pass. Upon opening his eyes, Ken found himself in a room of opulence, with a maid tearfully overwhelmed with emotion. A beautiful woman introduced herself as his mother. Looking into the mirror, he was struck by a shocking revelation. Who was this white-haired boy with a streak of green? Naturally, Ken lost his composure, flailing about in confusion, staring at his own hands and feet, oblivious to the two people around him who kept repeating strange phrases. They believed Ken was still in shock, having been bedridden for a week. As their words faded, they left the room to prepare a meal, filled with love for their precious son. After what felt like an eternity of self-reassurance, Ken realized he had logged into a new server, or reincarnated, just like in the novels. Of course, he had met his end in the old world, stabbed and left for dead. Staying idle wasn't an option, so Ken began bouncing around the bed, eager to explore this new world, while sneakily checking out his body to see if everything was in order. This little escapade caught the eye of the maid, who proposed an additional service, a bath with a beautiful girl. Even royalty had their limits. Seizing the chance to gather information while being forced to sleep, Ken wasted no time asking about his new world. First on the list was his username in this new server, Ken Colesilver. At just 3 years old, he had a father named Gam and a mother named Samin, along with an older sister named Jean, who was 2 years his senior. His mother was known as the second wife of a count, the first wife being named Maria, with whom he had 2 sons, Jean and Alec. His father, the count, held a prestigious position among the nobility, commanding an army and ruling over his own territory. However, this came with the heavy burden of defending against invasions from other nations. Additionally, Gam had to fend off threats from the monster-infested forest located to the south of the kingdom. Many adventurers frequented this area, skilled in swordplay and well-versed in the arcane arts. Yet, to reach such heights, Ken needed to learn to read and write. Simultaneously, he was determined to make this place his home, as he had no surviving relatives in the old world. He has been living here ever since. In his old world, Ken has no surviving family left. With the mind of a high school student, he quickly learns to read, write, and do math. This leaves his family members utterly astonished. They soon find themselves facing skepticism from those around them. With no other options, Ken can only use the excuse of wanting to learn about this world to justify his actions. This delights the Count, as he cannot allow Ken to take over the family estate. It is crucial for Ken to mature and learn to protect himself. Regarding his exposure to magic, after consulting with everyone, Ken decides to temporarily close off his desires until he receives a blessing. But that's just for show. Typically, he often gets himself into mischief, even breathing fire like a colossal version of a gas torch. Fortunately, he hasn't been caught yet, but his bragging has led him to meet a rather dark sister. Word has it that his younger brother is interested in this world, so she decides to lure him into attending a self-studying class. As a result, in the days that follow, Jay shows up daily to teach him. Of course, this also includes the rich history of the nation that has existed for 300 years. It is known that the first king was an adventurer named Dua who, for reasons unknown, decided to establish his own country. After hearing about his backstory, Ken feels that he might have come from Japan. Additionally, in this world, mythical creatures exist from elves to dwarves, even beastmen and incredibly soft beings. Time flies, and before he knows it, Ken is now 5 years old, and the blessing ceremony is approaching. The whole family quickly moves to the venue of the event. Prior to this, Ken had been briefly introduced by his sister to the status board, but the phrase haunting him is, "What is this, auntie?" According to the information he just received, there are levels of magic from 1 to 5, as well as blessings. The higher the level, the greater the quality of the individual. This makes blessings incredibly valuable. Naturally, the blessing ceremony is of utmost importance. Soon after, they arrive at the temple, and the ceremony officially begins. A blinding light appears, swiftly transporting Ken to the presence of 7 deities. They are the gods of creation, reincarnation, magic, war, skills, commerce, and earth. It turns out that due to the incident in Ken's old world, he need not take action, as fate had already decided the assassin would stumble and be subdued by the people. Moreover, the gods had chosen not to retain Ken's old memories, as they could lead him to suffer in extreme pain. However, Ken did not see it that way. He felt grateful for this and sincerely bowed his head in thanks to all of them. With a sincere bow of gratitude, Ken felt a surge of joy living with his family and diving deeper into this extraordinary world. It was his humble spirit that drew blessings from all 7 gods, a secret too wild to reveal. Back in his room, he dashed off to hide, curling up and scanning his stats. To his shock, all blessings were maxed out at level 10 when before 5 was the peak. Suddenly, those sly, dangerous smiles made sense. Luckily, his creative magic skill, Bonnet, let him fake some of the numbers on his sheet. But that was all because 7 gods blessing one soul had even his elders stunned, and no one could fake the insane mana count. A royal mage peaked at 10,000 mana, yet this 5-year-old had over 30,000. With stats like that, poverty was a worry of the past. Setting joy aside, the Count ordered absolute secrecy to the outside world and warned Ken against revealing this power a chaos would follow. Later, Ken stumbled across a summoning spellbook in his room and couldn't resist testing it out. Suddenly, a terrifying monster appeared while all he wanted was something soft to rest on. Bad timing, because both his sister and the demon were nearby. Ready to fight, he conjured a fireball in his palm and charged to punch the beast into oblivion. But instead, he got punched back. Ouch, that hurt. Still, Ken managed to reverse the spell, sending the summoned creature back where it came from. But once again, Ken collapsed, helpless as tears welled around him. This time, though, he sat up, moving freely unlike before, when he'd log out defeated. The birthday party for his 5th year went off without a hitch. There, Ken declared his dream, to be an adventurer, living free and protecting those he loves. Knowing his son still had much to learn, Gam arranged for tutors to guide him closely. Ken's eyes lit up finally, a chance to dive into what he loved. When the tutors arrived, Ken couldn't contain his excitement and accidentally teleported right into the teacher's fruit garden, face first. He even struggled a bit before settling down. According to the butler, their names were Murray and Nina. On day 1, they already made a rough impression. Both hailing from high-ranking noble families, redhead Ken couldn't keep cool introducing himself. Fixing their dresses, the 2 revealed backgrounds as ranked adventurers. Murray and Nina would train Ken for 3 years, promising a crucial chapter in his growth. But strangely, Ken's sword skills looked like a pro's aura fast, strong, and sharp. Nina coldly remarked he was stronger than redhead Ken, sparking a playful grudge where Ken challenged her to a duel. Yet, after just 1 strike, the fight was over. You could truly feel the power radiating. Then, both sides unleashed a dazzling flurry of slashes, beautiful to behold. Everything seemed normal, except for Ken. What's more, he fought with such ease, so effortlessly, while Lady Mueller grimaced and clenched her teeth in sheer exhaustion. Sensing danger, Nina decided to switch tactics. From fireballs to water spheres, from hurling earth to tossing stones, there wasn't a single spell this 5-year-old boy couldn't perform. He even easily blew away the training target in front of him. And here's the kicker, he cast spells without chanting any incantations. This kid is nothing short of a prodigy. Even the most skilled mages couldn't master every elemental magic like that. The conclusion was clear. Ken wasn't just blessed by the god of war, but he also carried the divine favor of the god of magic. The palace itself couldn't contain his overwhelming power, so Ken suggested all 3 of them organize extracurricular training outside. After all, the boy had never left the palace since his baptism. No sooner said than done. 2 adventurers quickly sought out Gam to report that the 5-year-old had already surpassed the beginner level in both swordsmanship and magic. Plus, if taught at an intermediate level, the young master would likely demolish the palace. His father sighed, knowing this day would come sooner than expected. When it came to organizing extracurriculars outside the palace, Gam didn't object. But the boy had to return home before sunset, not roam too far, and understand his limits. So, early that afternoon, the trio stepped into the vast, adventurous world, beyond a land brimming with promise and peril. They quickly approached a massive rock. Nina challenged Ken to demonstrate his intermediate magic. The moment he summoned a firewall, 2 rows of destructive heat surged forth, blasting straight toward the rock opposite them. They quickly made their way to a massive boulder. Nina proposed that the boy demonstrate a mid-level spell for her. As he unleashed a firewall, 2 streams of destructive heat erupted, racing toward the boulder before leaving behind a colossal crater. This spell surpassed mid-level by leaps and bounds. Not to mention, the boy showed no signs of fatigue, an indication of his staggering magical prowess. But setting that aside, the 2 adventurers suddenly sensed danger. As if on cue, a fearsome rabbit beast appeared, rushing towards the boy, believing him to be the weakest among them. But he deftly dodged the first strike and retaliated with a freezing blast, leaving the creature defeated in mere moments. Observing Nina using her spell to locate monsters, the boy asked how she did it. With a flick of her green hair, she explained that she emitted a small aura of magic to sense the distant monsters. Following her lead, He too was able to perceive their forms of feat many seasoned adventurers, including his teachers, had yet to achieve. That afternoon, the group enjoyed an incredibly fruitful hunting trip. But the boy, caught up in the thrill, nearly found himself in peril. He was drawn towards a forest known for harboring powerful monsters. This particular area was infamous for its periodic attacks on nearby towns, an event called the Beast Surge. Hence, the walls of the city had to be built with utmost care. Upon returning home to check his status, Gam discovered he had leveled up significantly even after just slaying a few rabbits. It turned out that the elders had increased the level up rates 100-fold. Yet, all he could do was cry out in frustration, cursing the old men for thinking Ken was strong enough to fight mid-level monsters. So, the group decided to swing by the Adventurers Guild to pick up a mission to hunt down a pack of wolves. Just as they were making their plans, a burly man with red hair appeared, using his higher rank to force the teachers to assist his group. Even high-level mages, including Ken's own teachers, couldn't perform such feats. That afternoon turned into a wildly productive hunting trip. But Ken got a little too absorbed and nearly got into trouble. The forest he dashed into was infamous, a known den for some of the fiercest monster species. Every few decades, these beasts would erupt into a full-scale assault on the city, an event known as the Beast Tide. That's why the city walls were built so meticulously. Checking his status later, Masterman was stunned to find Ken had leveled up significantly, even though he'd only casually sliced a few rabbits. Turns out, the old sages had boosted the experience rate by 100 times, but Ken could only cry and curse at them for it. Believing Ken was strong enough to tackle mid-tier monsters, the group decided to swing by the Adventurers Guild and accept a mission to take down a pack of wolves. Just when things were calm, a red-haired uncle barged in, arrogantly forcing the pair of teachers to serve his group, relying on his higher rank. The moment he tried to lay a hand on Muley, little men gently stopped him, asking him to cease his harassment. But that smug face got under men's skin, and he accidentally landed a punch that sent the man sprawling. As the red-haired man scrambled to stand and retaliate, Ken moved faster than lightning. Not only was he untouchable, but Ken also swept the man's legs, twisting him into a painful 180-degree lock. Furious, the man drew his sword against a 5-year-old, but no matter how fast or fierce his strikes were, he couldn't even graze a single hair on Ken. Ken blocked every attack with a simple one-handed parry before flinging the red-haired man far away. His two companions met the same fate. Time flew by, and 3 years later, the two tutors refused to renew their contracts with the Count's household. Treated kindly throughout their teaching tenure, they wanted to repay their gratitude. That very night, Ken rushed into the monster-infested forest, hunting every ferocious beast from high-level undead to earth dragons, even igniting flames so intense the military guards thought the beast tide had begun again. But when Ken's father led troops there, all they found was a massive crater, blocking their path, and the family's warning banner fluttering nearby. It was clear he guessed his son had stirred up trouble again. During class, the royal guards mistook his actions for a beast surge, but when his father led the troops to investigate, they found only a massive crater blocking their way. With a banner signaling his family's crest, it was clear his father suspected that this chaos was the work of his troublesome son. In his final lesson with the two teachers, he easily dispatched the weakest pack of wolves. Once he had cleared away the remains, the lesson officially came to a close. He quickly retrieved 2 spatial bags sewn green and 1 redshift he had specially prepared for his mentors. These bags contained materials from monsters that required an A-rank team to hunt, with a capacity equivalent to a grand estate. The fact that only Nina and May could use them made them treasures of national significance, but they were well deserved as he had grown close to them, experiencing joy from shared meals and gaining insights into the world he inhabited. He was even grateful for the adventures and true friendships he had forged rare treasures, even in a virtual world. Before he could finish his thought, both Nina and May quietly leaned in and shared a kiss. Thus, their teaching contract came to a heartfelt conclusion. Later that evening, Gam personally visited his son's room, inquiring about the appearance of a banner at the crater in the forest. He learned that Sylvia had confirmed it belonged to Ken. Upon hearing about his son's battle with the red-skinned orc and earth dragon, he could no longer contain his composure and let out a long sigh, recognizing the danger posed by these monsters. Just one of those beasts could flatten an entire town, and if they attacked, it could spell disaster. Feeling restless with nothing to do, Ken decided to venture straight into the forest to provoke some winged lizards, nearly paying the ultimate price as he almost got bitten in half. But this deity had dodged the attack, teleporting right above the enemy and launching into a fierce confrontation, which was over in less than a minute. Opening his status screen, he realized he might have overdone it. After slaying the dragon, his mana surged past 80 million, and he earned 2 titles, Monster Slayer of the Forest and Dragon Slayer. 2 years had flown by in the blink of an eye, and today Ken had to accompany his family to the capital for a debut banquet, a significant event for the son of a noble. The journey would take about a week, provided no monsters interfered along the way. Upon hearing this, he activated his tracking skill to scan for monsters and discovered a battle taking place ahead, roughly 3 kilometers from their position. Ken realized there were 50 monsters encircling 10 people in dire straits, and without hesitation, his father ordered his subordinates to rush to their aid. However, realizing they wouldn't arrive in time, Ken decided to take matters into his own hands and jumped into the fray. As he descended, he combined wind magic with physical enhancement, launching himself forward, much to his father's dismay. True to his expectations, when he arrived, the human side was already in disarray, leaving only one person still standing. Luckily, May had arrived just in time to cut down a monster. Then Ken charged ahead at breakneck speed. Wherever he went, light spears of magic struck down beasts, culminating in a stunning double slash at a nearby orc. But the remaining monsters were too close to the knights to use magic without risking their lives, so he drew his sword and began to slice them down one by one. Now it was a one-on-one showdown with the pack leader. Quickly leaping into the air, Ken gathered energy, igniting his sword in flames before delivering a decisive blow to the monster. Of course, the guards immediately activated their alert mode. With strength like his, it was hard to distinguish friend from foe. Only one stood firm. The fortunate men appeared just in time to slash the monster away. Then Ken dashed forward with blinding speed. Wherever he glided, light darts chased the beasts, ending with a swift double strike to the monster's head. The remaining monsters stayed close to the mages, so using magic risked harming allies. Ken chose to draw his sword and cut them down one by one. Soon it was a one-on-one battle against the pack leader. Leaping skyward, Ken ignited his blade and with a blazing slash, split the beast in two. But then the guards raised their alert. With power like his, how could they know if he was friend or foe? Understanding their fear, men knelt and began explaining his family background. Only then did the soldiers relax. Seeing lives hanging by a thread, Ken hurried over and used healing magic. Instantly, all wounds sealed. Now, all that remained was rest and nourishment to restore lost blood. For the fallen, Ken gathered their bodies into a magic box. Once everything was settled, the Count appeared. His jaw dropped when he saw Gia Huey in the carriage. 2 beautiful young ladies stepped out. Gam quickly confirmed they were Princess Letitia and Lady Sue. Ken nearly jumped out of his skin, realizing the people he'd saved were none other than Her Highness the Princess and the young Countess. After men finished introducing himself, the princess could no longer keep herself together. Without hesitation, Ken offered to cast a calming spell. Neither of them had a choice but to accept. As the 2 peaceful breaths settled, their souls seemed transported to a soft flower garden, every pain and fatigue melting away, though their hearts still raced wildly. The princess could no longer hold on, her spirit breaking, so young Ken didn't hesitate to suggest using calming magic. Neither of them had a choice but to agree. The moment the spell took effect, their souls felt as if transported to a soft flower garden, every ache and fatigue melting away. Even their hearts racing wildly couldn't shake this bliss. That spell, powered by the protagonist's radiant aura, was undeniably overpowered. Rejuvenated, the 2 approached Ken. After brief introductions, the interaction quickly turned into a playful tug-of-war that forced Ken to bite back the urge to protest he had urgent business in the capital. Instead of mercy, he was scooped up. Though there was space in the carriage, why did they sit like this? Ken's shy attempts to excuse himself were flatly denied. Adding the helpless expression of the old man sealed his fate. Just as things felt suffocatingly close, a soldier arrived to report they had reached the city, prompting everyone to arrange sleeping quarters. Of course, Ken wasn't let off the hook. The princess and the young duchess forced him to share a room, citing his trauma from the monster attack, but honestly, it was clear they were just smitten with the guy. The Count soon appeared to rescue his son, but since Ken was the strongest here, the duty to protect the 2 young ladies was non-negotiable. To share a room. Their excuse? Haunted by the monstrous attack, but no matter how you slice it, it screamed dude magnet. The Count quickly showed up to rescue his son, but the catch was, Ken was the strongest here, so protecting the 2 noble ladies was a non-negotiable duty. That night, the sight of 3 beds lined up side by side was shocking enough, but it got worse when the ladies squeezed so tight together they formed a human sandwich. The result? A panda trapped in a men's body. Yep, that was our poor Ken, who ended up sleepless all night. Days of sleepless nights later, Mai and the group finally arrived at the capital. The deputy captain of the guard, upon recognizing the tiny young man's true identity, bowed deeply in gratitude. Thanks to him, the knights had been safely escorted here, and he humbly asked permission to express his family's most sincere thanks. Because they all bravely fought to the point of sacrifice, he proposed the deputy captain honor their memory. Before he could finish, the deputy captain dropped to his knees, pledging to pass their story down through generations. So, thanks to Ken, the knights, though they had sacrificed, would still be honored. However, at the moment he was about to return home to his parents, he was stopped and forced to meet the king. Surrounded by many wealthy and powerful nobles, he couldn't afford to neglect the situation and quickly approached with reverence. According to the information from the president, Ken had single-handedly shattered an army of 50 monsters. There was even a superior species, the general, among them. Afterward, he treated all the soldiers and brought the fallen back to the capital. To sum it up, the achievements were monumental, and the king finally began to speak. He decided to grant the title of Baron, along with 100 silver coins and a mansion to Ken. This marked an unprecedented exception. A boy just 10 years old was bestowed with nobility. Of course, this quickly faced fierce opposition from a rotund man, known to be a marquis, who continuously protested. However, the king was furious and questioned him if he could take on the horde of monsters alone to have a say. The king's actions were driven by a special reason. Ken was too powerful to fall into the hands of the opposition. Upon hearing this, Min understood the problem. There was no other choice but to comply. At the private meeting, both the king and the duke bowed respectfully before Ken. They expressed their gratitude like true fathers, as he had saved their two precious daughters. In addition to granting him noble status, there was another equally important matter. As soon as the king finished speaking, he boldly announced that he would arrange a marriage contract for Ken with both young ladies. The young man was taken aback, but before he could protest, the king chastised him severely, accusing him of holding hands with the young ladies, and even sleeping in the same room, almost sharing a bed. To refuse now would be to show dissatisfaction with the two noble ladies. He feared that if he spoke out, he might be executed on the spot. He turned to seek help from his father, but his father's quick reaction of looking skyward and whistling made it clear he was out of reach. However, even with the marriage contract established, the two ladies wouldn't let him go, reminiscing about the days they spent together. The days when the three of them lay together, resulting in both the duke and the king losing their composure, questioning what had transpired. Naturally, Ken explained that nothing inappropriate had occurred. It was merely a matter of bed positioning. But how could he appease the two ladies, who were even more riled up than before? At home, he was pressured by his father and sister too, leaving him confused about whether this was a reward or a punishment. During a meeting at the royal church in the capital, Ken was once again brought to meet the gods and took the opportunity to inquire about his status board. He discovered that those stats were not human, and though his experience couldn't keep up with his level, he was still the most powerful being among humanity. After that, the creator god suggested promoting him to a demigod. Since there were many tasks Ken couldn't manage alone, he was strictly advised not to slack off or overexert himself. Pushing aside all the new knowledge he had just absorbed, the creator god reminded him about the issue of entertainment in this world. At that time, there were very few activities that could fulfill that need, so he wanted Ken to use his knowledge from the old world to create something new. As soon as the words were uttered, Ken sprang into action. But just as he turned, despite his experience not matching his level, Ken still stood as the most powerful being among humanity. Soon after, the creator god suggested his ascension to demigod status. With much still to accomplish and no way to do it all alone, he was reminded, never let your guard down or overexert yourself. Pushing aside the mountain of new knowledge he had just absorbed, the creator god shifted the topic to entertainment in this world. With so few options available to satisfy that need, he urged Ken to use his knowledge from the old world to create something new. Without hesitation, Ken got to work, but just as he returned, his sister dragged him off to try on dresses. As a boy caught in the whirlwind of this feminine chaos, he felt dread creeping in, yet he dared not voice his concerns. Eventually, he dashed out without leaving a word. Spotting a pair of familiar cat ears, he quickly recognized his friend Panma, who was currently training in the capital under a seemingly wise but flustered older brother when aristocracy was mentioned. While visiting their shop, inspiration struck him, and he proposed creating a new type of game. Sketching out a rough draft earned him the shopkeeper's enthusiastic approval. Eager to dive into the details, he tossed a gold coin onto the table, signaling his commitment to the project. However, the considerable amount made the shopkeeper hesitate, questioning if Ken could uphold the esteemed reputation of the Sajia Khan company. Ken promised to deliver exceptional work. Despite the situation seeming stable, outside, he faced nothing short of his sister's wrath, leading him to shower her with compliments to save his own skin. Yet, that very compliment dragged him into another predicament, watching his sister try on dresses from morning till evening. Thankfully, a maid arrived just in time, for Tamis, the shopkeeper, personally invited Ken to discuss the project's progress. Upon arrival, he found everything in order. Though it was just a rough draft, the shopkeeper prioritized it and aimed for perfection, balancing speed and quality. The interface was nothing short of spectacular, and Ken decided to play a test round right there. He became so excited that he lost his usual calm demeanor. He confidently declared that this would surely become a trend. Now came the production phase, where they had to separate versions for commoners and nobles since wealthy patrons always desired luxury. For the rest, the shop would produce at a price anyone could afford. Just as worries about funding began to surface, Ken shattered them in an instant this time. It wasn't just one coin, but 5 gold coins. Truly, a person of wealth could resolve matters swiftly, leaving the shopkeeper with no choice but to bow his head and promise to give his all. But first, they had to draft a contract and present it to the god of commerce. This would ensure their product couldn't be replicated for the next 3 years. As soon as the incantation was completed, the item vanished from their sight. Ken set a deadline for the launch in a month. He asked the shopkeeper to prepare a special and luxurious set, as he would personally present it as a gift to the royal family. Hamis, barely able to believe a small to medium-sized shop like his, would have the honor of crafting something for the king. Little did he know that Vanished Game Board would now serve as a demo product for the gods, and the royal family was not to be taken lightly. Arriving home without a moment's rest, he was hurried off to the launch party. Now a baron, Ken had to be more mindful of his decorum. As he entered the lavish hall, his first encounter was with none other than the Marquis and his family. Instead of meeting the Duke and his future wife, which would have been a greater honor, he had to pretend nothing had ever happened. Bowing respectfully, he introduced himself. With a few charming words, he made the future wife beam with delight. Both the Duke and the elder gentleman firmly believed he was indeed the epitome of innocence. Then came the grand entrance of the royal family, followed by a toast from all the nobles, high and low. During his introduction as the new baron, Ken casually dropped a few compliments that sent the princess into a frenzy of joy. Naturally, although the king was furious, he had no choice but to grit his teeth and endure. Seizing the rare opportunity, Ken presented the toy he had crafted himself. Inevitably, the moment arrived when the king, curious about the rules of this new game, invited the baron's family for a meeting after the banquet. When asked by his father about his venture into business, Ken honestly admitted that part of his motivation was his lack of funds to maintain the estate he was soon to receive. With a son of his age, there was little to worry about. Just as he spoke, Siu swiftly approached due for a walk. The princess, currently beside the king, found this outing akin to a private first date for the two of them. Utilizing her fiancé's shyness, the young lady got closer in delightful surprise. Ultimately, she completely disarmed the young man, who could be a shark on the streets but was merely a guppy at home. Just then, a group of young men from the Marquis family appeared, showering Siu with empty flattery, receiving nothing back but a cold shrug. The curly-haired boy boldly claimed that Ken must apologize to him, since he was the son of the Marquis, advising him to get lost. Hearing this, Ken stood up, introducing himself as the Baron. Misunderstanding his words, the young brats assumed he was the Marquis's son, and they pressed forward, bullying him even more. The chubby one, taking advantage of his position, suggested Ken kneel and apologize. Despite being in the wrong first, Ken decided to play along and challenged all three to a proper duel outside. Witnessing the beautiful and noble young lady getting close to a mere baron infuriated the young men. To the young man, who was a shark on the streets but a mere fish at home. At that moment, a group of the Marquis's boys appeared from nowhere, throwing around some empty compliments, but received nothing in return except a cold shrug. The curly-haired boy boasted that Ken was the Marquis's son, advising men to know his place and quickly perform his duties before leaving. Upon hearing this, Ken stood up and introduced himself as the Baron. The young bullies misunderstood him as the son of the Baron and took the opportunity to bully him even more. The fat one overstepped his bounds and demanded that Ken apologize. Seeing that he was in the wrong first, Ken decided to play along to the end. He challenged all three of them to a proper solo duel outside. Seeing the beautiful noble lady getting too friendly with the Baron's son made the young men jealous, so they decided to pull out their spellbooks to show off. But lo and behold, after reading the super lame spell, they puffed their chests and glowed uncontrollably, only to produce a flame smaller than a chili pepper. It left everyone utterly astonished. Ken was so flustered that he didn't know how to react without hurting the children. After wasting a few seconds watching the golden-haired boy dance wildly, he finally conjured a bit of sand blowing in the wind, unable to contain his laughter at the sight of the young bullies acting like fools before him. Sio couldn't stay silent any longer and personally spoke up, first introducing Ken's identity as the Baron, not just the Marquis's son. Then he recounted his lineage from the Count family in the Borderlands, ending with a glorious tale of defeating 50 monsters. Upon hearing this, the bullies quickly knelt and fled the scene. It was only natural. Staying would not only be dangerous, but would also bring shame upon themselves. Knowing that Ken was intentionally doing this to play with the younger ones, Sio was just about to tell the princess everything when Ken covered her mouth with his hand. But the outcome was a bit different than expected. Both of them began He personally stepped forward, first introducing himself as the Baron, not just the baron's son. Then he recounted tales of his noble lineage from a count's family in the borderlands, ending with a heroic anecdote about defeating 50 creatures. The kids, upon hearing this, dropped to their knees and fled in terror. And who could blame them? Staying behind would not only be dangerous but would also bring shame upon themselves. Realizing that his husband was intentionally trying to tease the younger ones, Shu was about to spill everything to the princess when Ken quickly covered his mouth. But the result was a little unexpected. The two of them found themselves in a battle of wits. The cause? Ken had dared to touch the face of a single maiden. Meanwhile, the princess was silently yearning for his affection, yet unable to make a move. Purple-haired Sylvia insisted it was their first date. Thankfully, Ken cleverly promised he would accompany the princess next time, otherwise there would have been bloodshed for sure. But can one really escape fate? The promise of a date was overheard by the king, resulting in a fierce glare directed at these two husbands. The following morning, Ken arrived at the royal palace to collect the keys and the layout of his estate. With the king engaged in an important meeting, the president stepped in to hand over these prized items. Just when he thought he could escape the emperor and head home early, he was confronted by his second father-in-law, the duke, who immediately challenged him to a game of chess. Soon he found himself entangled with a crowd of high-ranking officials. At this hour, getting home early seemed impossible, and he might end up returning later than usual. That afternoon, after navigating through the map's directions for an eternity, Ken finally set foot in his own estate. But this place looked more like a battleground than a home. Fearful of some unseen force, the young man greeted every corner with a respectful bow. The only question lingering was how he could possibly inhabit such an expansive space. With the place so messy it seemed cursed, he decided to use some basic magic to tidy up. But not only did he clean, he restored everything and upgraded it to a level beyond imagination. Truly, this was the pinnacle of magic. After a short wait, the maid team and the new butler would soon arrive. Leading the charge was Sylvia Super, his close confidante, who had been with him since childhood. Beside her stood the young, muscular brother, who would now serve as the butler of the household. Both had heard quite a few tales about each other, mostly through the same source, but Ken's reputation stood out. Known for his musical prowess, he had even conjured magic to clear the forest of foes. Who would believe this young man had just arrived in this world? Immediately he assigned his subordinates to begin the cleanup. Yet, with so much dust lingering, he wondered how they could tackle the stains. Sylvia wasn't too surprised to hear him say he had used magic to clean everything perfectly. It was only Doan who, still unfamiliar, appeared bewildered by the sight. Let's talk magic blowing away an entire forest. Who would believe a newbie could pull that off? Without missing a beat, he ordered his subordinates to start cleaning up. But when there wasn't even a speck of dust left, talk about spotless. Sylvia wasn't surprised when he said he'd wiped everything away with magic. Only Doan remained skeptical, eyes wide with disbelief. Even though the housekeeper was startled, he quickly regained composure and told Ken to hurry home. Because today was a big day, he was finally reuniting with his two older brothers, Jane and Alex, after a long separation. Both praised Ken's incredible achievements. Add their sister's endless compliments on top, and you've got a family hype train. Everyone was eager to visit the youngest brother's home. But the two older brothers weren't so easily convinced. They kept warning that the house was old and filled with hidden dangers. This was the first time Ken saw his sister genuinely afraid, but she quickly passed the responsibility to him, insisting Ken would personally escort them, no worries needed. But this old and shabby vibe, Gam remembered visiting this place years ago, but now it felt strangely unfamiliar. Glancing at his son, the reason became clear. Dad was definitely up to some magic mischief again. After touring the house, Gam realized it felt dry and life left no artwork to be found. It's common for nobles to cherish art and decorate their homes accordingly. Mentioning Monster Capital, our guy wasted no time ordering more art to brighten the place up. But somehow, the decorations seemed off. It made sense, as a ghastly creature lay sprawled right in the middle of the room. According to the information shared by the Count, ZDA was known as a disaster-level monster. In fact, to vanquish it, one would need a mountain of A-class adventurers' corpses. Yet here was a young boy, barely hitting puberty, taking it all in stride. Nevertheless, it must be said, this specimen alone was worth thousands of platinum coins, possibly more appealing as decor than anything the butler could suggest. Once again, a piercing scream echoed through the halls. This time it was Mayen's mother, rushing in, startled by the sight of a toilet spray. Hearing this, the father, sitting high and mighty, scoffed, wondering what the fuss was all about. But once he tried it himself, he understood the sheer brilliance. He even suggested installing the system throughout the estate. For a father, that might have been a tad bold. Besides, there was a rule that men had to follow upon receiving a noble estate. A grand introduction party must be hosted, inviting the elite to visit. Fortunately, the butler had prepared all the invitations and guest lists. They were somewhat lucky not to have to invite the king, given Mayen's current status. But his friend Ken was forced to extend an invitation to the Marquis's family from before. Ken appeared quite flustered, unsure how to please the nobility. Sylvia advised him not to dwell on formalities. Instead, he should pour his heart into it. With that encouragement, Ken dived headfirst into crafting unique glassware while personally guiding the chef in preparing some exquisite dishes. A maid took a bite and instantly felt as if she were ascending to the heavens. But when the king discovered that he hadn't received an invitation from his son-in-law, he summoned men to the royal palace to question him. However, it was all due to the country's laws. The lower ranks had little power to change anything. Adding to the tension, the duke stood beside him, waving the invitation card like a flag. The king was infuriated to the point of tears. Thankfully, men had prepared for this moment. He exaggeratedly claimed he intended to deliver the invitation to the king personally, all thanks to the meticulous planning of the butler. Otherwise, he might never have returned home. Of course, both his wives, the Letia and S, would also be present. The king, now the son-in-law, summoned Ken to the royal palace to confront him. But really, it was just the law of the land. What could a small fry do against that? The duke stood nearby, waving a card, escalating the tension even more. The king's fury turned purple, nearly bringing tears right there. Mai, however, was prepared. He spun a tale about personally delivering an invitation, crediting the meticulous groundwork of the housekeeper, without which he might never have made it home. Naturally, there was the expressions on the faces of the two wives, Letia and S, were priceless. The servants, hearing that the king himself would attend, instantly lost all composure. And, with the princess, the master's fiancée, present too, tension filled the air. But they had to hold it together. Though warned well in advance, stepping into the first hall of the Marquis's mansion left the duke breathless at the sight of the Zerga-gone specimen. Yet, that wonder had to wait now. Came Min's moment to greet the guests. After delivering his prepared speech, the feast officially began. No need to say, the astonishment over the drinks was palpable. The sparkling glassware only added to the spectacle, and trunk-wise craftsmanship was beyond question. Just then, the king and his family arrived swiftly. Even the wealthiest noble was caught off guard by the exquisite patterns on those glasses. And when the meat dish exploded with flavor, the moment was perfect. At that instant, the queen casually inquired about the toilet facilities. Curiosity piqued. The king went to try it himself. Who could resist such fascination? Rumor had it he was smitten and insisted on installing the system throughout the palace. From the food, everyone was taken aback by just how surprising the drink was. Adding a sparkling glass only elevated the elegance of the experience. Just then, the king and his family arrived, and even the wealthiest man in the kingdom couldn't help but admire the intricate design of that glass. And when they added the explosion of flavors from the meat dish, it was perfection. At that very moment, the queen unexpectedly inquired about the toilet. The king, curious about the hype, decided to try it himself, intrigued by the idea of installing such a system in the palace. From food and drink to sanitation, every service was nothing short of exceptional and filled with surprises. The king had no choice but to praise this as the pinnacle of hospitality. Just then, the Marquis, oblivious to the ongoing excitement, arrived and immediately mocked the small estate, likening it to a nostril. However, he was soon taken aback upon entering the first hall, as he had no clue about the Zeddon specimen. Being late and arrogant, he was despised by all, even going so far as to criticize the drink before tasting it, only to realize how delicious it actually was. But he stubbornly insisted it was bad anyway. When it came to the food, he behaved the same way. When Min offered him 2 glass cups as gifts, the Marquis dismissed them, demanding to take all the glasses, wine, and recipes home. When the young man refused, explaining that these were collective gifts, he acted as if he was the highest authority in the room. Min had already begun searching to see where the king was currently situated. When the king approached, he suggested gifting the Marquis the greatest treasure of the nation, and upon seeing the king's face, he nearly fainted on the spot. And so, what was meant to happen came to pass. Sino was swiftly reprimanded for his lack of decorum, arriving even later than the king. After enduring the king's wrath, he scurried away in embarrassment, but Ken was no better off. The king knew he had been dragged into this ridiculous plan, and turned to reprimand him, leaving him unable to face the world. After the feast, he still had to kneel to take responsibility, making his situation utterly miserable. The next day, Ken set out to meet the vice-captain, with the primary goal of selling monster scraps as per Prime Minister Magana's instructions. Now, to assess the quality, he needed a place to store it. As soon as he finished speaking, the vice-captain led him to the warehouse and instructed him to temporarily toss all the remains inside. Ken wanted to comply, but the room was too small, leaving him uncertain about what to do. The vice-captain then inquired if there were any Zerzagon left. Fortunately, the answer was no. but instead there were several gigantic earth dragons, which could only be taken down by an A-rank party of adventurers. With no other option, they had to deal with it on the field immediately to keep it fresh. The vice-captain instructed him to showcase the merchandise there first. Although he knew it would be terrifying, he had no idea it would be this overwhelming. To make it worse, the young man was laughing loudly while asking if the royal family would accept everything. He even boldly asked if he was a messenger of the gods. This inadvertently caused Ken to pause for a moment, raising both hands in denial. "I'm just an ordinary percent so. Ordinary, I couldn't be more so." After the vice-captain took responsibility for inspecting all the monsters, Ken immediately turned to leave early. But to his dismay, he was still dragged to the night's training session. However, the captain was not easily accessible. He only appeared for mock battles. The soldiers were quite skeptical, as they all thought of Ken as just a child, neither more nor less. This led to a one-on-one clash, with the elder, hair spiked, pointing his sword with utmost respect. Hearing this, Ken powered up and charged like a superhero, moving so fast that the human eye could barely follow. He returned early, only to find himself caught up in the night training session. Yet, the captain was not someone one could just meet at will. A mock battle was required for his appearance. The soldiers were perplexed, as they all regarded Ken as nothing more than an ordinary boy. This led to a one-on-one showdown. The elder, hair standing on end, pointed his sword forward, bowing respectfully. Upon hearing the signal, Ken activated his enhancements and dashed forward like a superhero, moving faster than the eye could follow. In just half a second, he delivered a decisive swing that sent the elder's sword soaring into the sky. Realizing he might have overdone it, he decided to retreat, but was quickly caught and found himself facing 100 opponents. Just then, a female voice rang out, calling for everyone to stop. She descended from the rooftop, performing several 360-degree spins in midair, before landing gracefully to embrace the boy in front of her, fearing that the crowd would intimidate him. Immediately, she turned to scold her subordinates, and Daimei began to reveal the truth. The youth before them was none other than the heroic Baron, who single-handedly defeated the monsters to rescue the princess and the young lady. As the words left Daim's lips, the captain's expression darkened, an aura of menace enveloping him. The girl, undeterred, drew her sword with a bright smile, aiming it directly at the 10-year-old. With no shame but plenty of boldness, she, the sword saint, charged at him without hesitation. Faced with this outrageous situation, Ken somersaulted backward, using the wall as a springboard to leap forward and confront the captain. Every clash of their swords resonated with a sound that split the air. The speed of their exchange was astonishing. This was the first time Jian Namvung witnessed someone matching the prowess of the sword saint. At the moment their blades met, Ken channeled his mana and executed a swift backward leap. By the time the sword saint turned back, Ken had the wooden blade poised against her throat. Just when victory seemed secure, she abruptly proposed marriage to him. It was then that she finally introduced herself as Tifana, insisting that age differences didn't matter. She explained how she had been forbidden by her parents from returning home until she found a fiancé. With no other options, Ken turned to seek help from his vice-captain, only to find him fast asleep. Switching to a serious demeanor, he stated that such decisions couldn't be made unilaterally, leaving Ken bewildered. He wouldn't return until he found his fiancée. With no options left, Ken turned to seek help from the vice-captain, but he had already fallen asleep. When he finally regained his serious demeanor, he stated that he couldn't make this decision alone, thinking Ken was mature enough to drop the idea. But Ken changed his mind and decided to confront the Emperor directly, something he had never done before, to ask for permission to marry another wife. Upon hearing this request from the Sword Saint, both the king and his father were left speechless, their expressions a mix of shock and awe. It was known that the Jebel region, Tifana's homeland, was a nation of the oppressed, where most of its people were so beautiful that many powers sought to enslave them. However, this place was different. According to the proverbs left by the first king, this land was seen as protected by the kingdom. In reality, they maintained their autonomy and had not changed. To put it another way, Tifana was practically the princess of an entire nation. Just as she was about to reveal her engagement, she was even more excited when she heard that such rare talent had been accepted by both the king and the duke. She felt compelled to claim him as her own. At just 10 years old, he was strong enough to defeat the Sword Saint, and coupled with the detail of him being questioned about being a messenger of the gods, both the Emperor and the Prime Minister decided to show Ken a special book. After accepting the invitation from the vice-captain, Ken went to meet. This was a legacy left by the founding king himself, and this time they decided to let him read it, expanding his knowledge. Seeing Ken understand every detail inscribed within, the king let out a sigh and began to reveal that the contents of the book were written in Japanese. Reflecting on the name of the first king, it became clear that no matter how one reasoned, it could only relate to the Japanese. There was no longer any reason to deny it. Ken decided he would reveal all the secrets he had been keeping. However, if anyone failed to understand him, they would all have to face him, and he would leave the kingdom. Specifically, he retained the memories of his previous life in another land, sharing the same space as the first king of Japan. As for being the son of Gam, that was entirely true. The gods had revealed it during that baptism ceremony, 7 gods, to be exact. While the king was left speechless, the elder insisted on checking his son's current status screen. With the stats and titles this kid possessed, not just the king, but the entire world would have to kneel before him. However, Ken was very satisfied with his current life. Ever since reincarnating, knowing nothing about this world, he had his parents and many kind people around him. The experiences of using magic and battling monsters were all unforgettable. He also had to mention his 2 lovely wives, the king, and the pride of being titled a baron. Back in his old world, Ken's life had been utterly devoid of anything lonely and isolated in the shadows. With that said, men immediately stood up, affirming that he wished to continue living his current life. He felt grateful for the opportunity to be part of the family. Then he turned to the emperor to apologize for concealing the truth all this time, hoping to live as Ken from now on. Before Ken could finish, the king quickly affirmed that he understood everything and agreed to men's request. Just then, a blue-haired aunt burst in with a letter, specifically informing him that his father had agreed to let him marry, and then promptly whisked Ken off for training. Naturally, this left everyone present feeling helpless. But now that things were settled, there was peace of mind. Even if he was a goofy divine messenger like this, there was nothing to worry about. Ken would remain Ken, unchanged. As soon as the emperor finished speaking, he stood up and ordered everyone present who witnessed today's events to keep it to themselves, including their families. That evening, his 2 wives sought him out for a face-to-face confrontation, of course to question the appearance of a third party. But before they could finish their sentences, the Sword Saint barged in to take him for training. Regarding the first king's presence in this land after an accident that led to his death in Japan, no one understood why he was summoned here. It was entirely different from men. Specifically, the king retained his old body. While he was engrossed in reading, out of nowhere, his 2 wives appeared, mentioning the entrance exam at the Magic Academy and proposing to study together with Ken. Mustering all the courage he had accumulated over 2 lives, the young man stood up and gently excused himself, slipping away. But avoiding one problem led him to encounter another. His 2 tiny wives soon followed, along with his Sword Saint wife. Of course, Stefana had just appeared and immediately urged her husband to do a few solo battles to warm up. However, he declined again and began to flee towards the door. Returning home, he quickly changed into a slightly dusty outfit. Today was Ken's 12th birthday, the very day he registered to become an adventurer, a moment he had waited over a decade for. Without hesitation, he rushed to the Adventurers Guild in the Capitala place of immense scale. Enthralled by the sights, he accidentally bumped into a red-haired guy. Knowing that Ken had just turned 12, the redhead shared some advice. You only live once, so you must cherish it. Taking a closer look at the redhead, he felt a sense of familiarity and quickly moved to the reception desk to complete his registration. Ken started the process by providing a blood sample to register his information. Of course, since it was his first day, Ken's card would be a bronze rank, but before he could leave, a group of older men came over, looking to bully him. Upon arrival, they began teasing the receptionist, then started to mock Ken. It was baffling what went through their minds to pick on a child. But it was fine, a little trick from men, and he was out of there. The blonde guy saw this and threw a punch, but it had no effect. The leading man was furious and was about to draw his sword when that red-haired guy appeared again. He was known as the Cloud of Ice Fire. After the older men were intimidated by a few threats, they promptly left the scene. Even Cloud could easily see the peculiarities in Ken's evasive maneuvers, affirming that he was knowledgeable. The 2 young men then decided to grab a drink together. The Cloud of Icefire insisted that men had undergone extensive training, otherwise he would have surely taken a hit. His evasiveness was so precise, with no wasted movements. Ken boasted about the teachings he received from his tutor since childhood, while the introduction of this Cloud of Icefire revealed he was part of a team led by Claude, wielding a fire sword while his wife used ice magic. Upon seeing the golden card in the redhead's hand, it was easy to guess that the couple belonged to the A rank, although that was still nothing compared to the SSS rank. Of course, only one person in history had achieved that, none other than the first king. Just as they were talking, a blue-haired girl suddenly appeared. She was the wife of the Cloud of Icefire. He returned home with his mother. It was hard to fathom why those men attacked a child, but it didn't matter. With a simple move, he could evade their blows. The blonde man attempted another strike, but it was just as ineffective. The leading man, furious, was about to draw his sword when Ken's red-haired companion appeared. He was known to the world as the Cloud of Icefire. The menacing figures, hearing a few threats, quickly retreated from the scene. Even the Icefire could easily discern the oddities in Ken's dodging skills, affirming that he was indeed a knowledgeable fighter. Next, the two young men headed out for a drink. The cloud of ice fire was adamant that Ken had undergone rigorous training, or he would undoubtedly have been hit. His evasive maneuvers were far too precise. Ken boasted that he had been taught since childhood, and regarding the appearance of the ice fire, it was known that he was part of the team led by Claude, who wielded a fire sword while his wife used ice magic. The name Ice Flame belongs to Claude's team. He wields a fiery sword, while his wife commands ice magic. Spotting the golden card on the redhead's hand, it was clear this pair ranked A-class, but still a notch below the legendary SSS tier. Naturally, the only person ever to reach that pinnacle was none other than the first king in history. Mid-conversation, a sudden appearance here girl with emerald hair, the wife of the gatekeeper. After reminding Min to ask for help if needed, she swiftly grabbed her husband's head and dragged him away. She hated drunkards fiercely. Their first mission, slay the goblins. But before they could go far, they crossed paths with the Sword Saint. Knowing he had just registered as an adventurer and was on a quest, she eagerly insisted on tagging along. Despite it being the day of the night team's training, the vice-captain had no choice but to comply. Quest grinding was an odd affair. The old lady held the 12-year-old's hand, whispering chilling tale show living in the forest with her husband, sent her heart racing, turning the moonlit nights into soothing breezes. Upon finding the goblin den, the duo hurried there, only to find ruins and a helpless man sprawled on the ground. Without much talk, they swiftly approached and chased off the goblins. Meanwhile, the young warrior, Ken, lied about slaying 30 Xin-Lai, but was met with a scolding for ignorance from the green-haired girl. Then, she called in her sister unexpectedly. Tifanna appeared. Upon meeting, the siblings stuck together like glue. Tifanna was busy discussing with the guildmaster about the ogre horde and the green-skinned beasts. Time to lay all cards on the table. The green-haired girl began calling Ken her man first. These two heroes had saved the princess and Lady Sue by defeating a mob of 50 ogres. Add the Marquise's precious son to the mix, and chaos was inevitable. Seeing his subordinate stunned and lonely, the guildmaster revealed he was Tiafanna's older brother, causing Ken to jump in shock. According to the law, commoners disrespecting nobles face immediate execution. Hearing this, Anku was terrified yet assured he wouldn't act rashly, advising the guildmaster to avoid hasty judgments like this one. Just then, a new horde of monsters emerged from the shadows. Though intimidating, the encouragement from her beloved husband filled her with courage. Fear became a distant memory. She fought valiantly, exclaiming, "Oh darling, I love you so much. Together we'll have children and fight side by side. There are no words left to describe this." At that moment, a gigantic goblin appeared, 3 times the size of the others. However, the holy sword remained undeterred, leaping high into the sky, delivering a powerful blow that secured victory, resonating like wedding bells in her mind. Just then, another terrifying wave of monsters emerged, and Ken suggested that Tifanna evacuate the victim while he activated ice magic for a wide-area attack. He had always been adept at maneuvering the rocks in the forest. Moments later, when Emley and Nina arrived, all that remained was a massive crater. Time to head back. As for Ken, he returned to the Adventurers Guild to report that he had just defeated a few Xin-Lai. A single blow would classify it as a D-rank request, but a horde would elevate it to a C rank. As he prepared to report the count of 30, he realized he had no choice but to confront the guild leader directly. However, the leader was skeptical. Instead, he inquired who had provided such a horde of monsters. How could a novice who had just registered yesterday possibly defeat 30 D-rank monsters? Ken could no longer endure the humiliation. He firmly asserted that he had achieved this feat alone, but was accused of lying, leading to the confiscation of both his guild card and his status as an adventurer. It turned out that the green-haired man was indeed the guild leader. The man began recounting how Ken claimed to have slain 30 Xin-Lai, but was met with nothing but derision from the green-haired leader. Then he called for his sister. To Ken's surprise, it was Tifanna. As they locked eyes, it was as if a spell had been cast. She was sitting with the guild leader discussing the horde of goblins and the green-skinned creatures. Now, the cards were on the table. The green-haired leader began to refer to Ken as a man, stating that the two heroes had rescued the princess and Lady Sue by defeating a horde of 50 goblins. With the guildmaster present, Anku inquired about the 30 Jin Lazat kills and quickly got approval to purchase the bounty. Initially aiming to promote Ken to C rank, news of his defeating Zergagon at age 10 and overpowering the night team captain changed everything. He was the strongest in the entire country, so there was no choice but to elevate him to A rank with the condition he must prove himself by capturing bandits. After Anku agreed, he ordered his subordinates to expedite the paperwork, leaving the 3 to talk privately. Honestly, hearing that his sister married a teenager stunned and made the big brother suspicious. Yet, this first meeting seemed promising. The couple's tender moments left Ken dumbfounded, unsure how to process their affectionate exchanges. The strength displayed made some older men feel awkward, which was expected to all. A 12-year-old human at this level was normal, unlike others who barely seemed human. Abandoning the idea of unleashing Inferno, Ken raised a single finger skyward, conjured a small fireball, transforming it into blue flames that shot straight at the target dummy. At the moment the attack struck the dummy, a colossal blue energy beam erupted, blasting away the target, walls, shields, and a vast area around it. There was no other choice. While the examiners checked for casualties, the candidates were sent to the sword training ground for another test. To prepare for this exam, the school specially invited A-rank adventurers, including the redhead brother, Claude. Claude came straight to Ken, demanding a duel. Though Ken tried to refuse, his opponent was the highest-ranking examiner here, so he was forced to engage. Facing an A-rank enemy, Ken immediately activated his speed boost and charged at the Ice Flame duo. What followed was a breathtaking clash of swords at blinding speed. Of course, the other students watching turned pale, unable to keep up. Claude's enthusiasm bordered on madness, testing a kid with full power. The fight escalated quickly. Each strike met an equally fierce parry. Seeing the situation intensify, Ken reminded them to be mindful of the students' safety. He could handle it, but others might not survive such intensity. Speaking of this, they mentioned a suitable person to be Ken's mentor, but that individual was currently isolating themselves in solitude. The next morning, men awoke to find her maid rushing in, screaming in a panic. It was understandable today was the day of the entrance exam for the academy, but Ken remained calm, confident that he would arrive on time. As soon as he finished speaking, men dashed toward the mansion's door, quietly turned right, and used a teleportation spell. In an instant, she arrived at the school gate in less than a heartbeat. This young man was so confident that he felt like he was hacking the game. After reporting his name and receiving his candidate number, Ken was assigned to seat number 10 in room A. Upon entering, he noticed everyone else was tense, clutching their books. But for him, it felt much easier since he had avoided the two sisters. At that moment, the proctor entered and began distributing the exam papers. The exam would last for 2 hours, and thanks to all the knowledge gained, Ken found the reading, writing, and calculation tasks as easy as chewing gum. However, history was a subject that every noble needed to master. And so, what was meant to happen did happen. Not even 30 minutes into the exam, men had already finished her paper. The proctor approached her, surprised, as this was the first time she had encountered such a situation. Next was the magic test. Confident in her protective barrier, the proctor assured them that no matter how powerful the magic, it would hold up. As the signal to begin echoed, students rushed forward, casting spells at the target, but the power of some made the others freeze in shock. It made sense. At 12 years old, this was standard. But not everyone could match the power of Ken. Abandoning the idea of using Inferno, men raised a single finger to the sky, gathering her magic to form a fireball, which she then transformed into green flames and shot straight at the target before her. In that instant, as the attack hit the target, a massive surge of green energy erupted. Not only did it obliterate the target, but it also sent debris flying, including walls and shields, and a wide area around it vanished into the wind. The proctors, concerned about any injuries, decided to move the students to the training ground for a different test. To prepare for this entrance exam, the school had specially invited Class A adventurers to conduct the tests. Among them was Ken's older brother, CL. He approached with a direct order to test Ken. Although Ken had requested to decline, the proctor, being the highest-ranking examiner there, insisted he fight. Since his opponent was Class A, upon entering the match, men instantly activated her speed buff and charged toward the flame member. What followed was an intense duel between two swordsmen at incredible speeds. Naturally, the other students outside could only watch in awe, unable to keep up. The opponent, overly eager, activated his buff while testing a child. This pushed the battle to a peak level. Ken sliced once, and the opponent blocked the strike. Sensing the situation was getting tense, Ken reminded him about the proper way to assess students. Since it was him, it was fine, but going this hard against other students would likely leave them in shock. The proctor couldn't hold back and suggested they both stop. Fighting at that level was simply not something the other candidates could handle. Seeing that if left alone, these two would talk for hours, he decided to intervene and sent Ken straight home. All he had to do now was wait in silence for the results from the school. The examiner couldn't hold back and ordered them to stop. Fighting at that level was impossible for the other candidates to follow. Sensing the tension, he stepped in to separate them and sent Ken home to await results silently. The next day, the official was summoned by the king to explain the damage caused during the test. Innocently, the man claimed the examiner urged him to unleash full power. Despite lowering the spell's level, the barrier couldn't withstand the assault, leading to the destruction. With nothing left but to vanish into the wind, the proctors checked if anyone was hurt while the candidates were sent to the sword training grounds for another test. To prepare for this exam, The school invited A-rank adventurers, including the red-haired elder brother Claude. Naturally, he came directly to challenge Ken. Despite Ken's polite refusals, Claude's status as the highest-ranking proctor meant Ken was forced into the duel. Facing an A-rank opponent, Ken immediately activated his speed buff and charged at the fiery-haired challenger. What followed was a breathtaking clash of swords at lightning speed. Everyone watching turned pale, unable to keep up with the furious pace. Claude got so fired up testing a kid that he boosted his own power too, pushing the duel into an electrifying crescendo. Every strike was met with an equal parry, the tension crackling in the air. Seeing things getting out of hand, Ken reminded the proctors about the test's purpose. While he could handle it, other students wouldn't survive such intensity. The proctors finally intervened, asking both fighters to stop. The rest couldn't keep up with such a high-level mock battle. Knowing the duel would drag on otherwise, Claude took the initiative to end it and sent Ken home, telling him to quietly await the school's results. The next day, the elder was summoned by the king, questioned about the destruction caused. Innocently, he blamed the proctor for ordering him to unleash full power. Though he anticipated the barrier wouldn't hold and lowered his magic to minimal levels, disaster still struck. It was then revealed that Ken could wield Imperial-level magic and had plans to test it somewhere only to be stopped by the Emperor, the Count, and the Prime Minister. They learned Ken took the exam at the Southern Gate, explaining the school's strict regulations and the high stakes involved in his trial. The city was split into two parts, North and South. The North led to the noble district, while the South was home to commoners and others. As he finished speaking, Ken suddenly realized he had entered through the wrong gate. Flashback to the past, the principal had gone directly to the Duke to report a troubling issue. A commoner candidate had scored a perfect score on all exams, even matching the level of an A-rank adventurer, and had destroyed the training ground in the process. Before the principal could finish, the Duke burst out laughing like a turkey. Who else but his future son-in-law, poor Morgana the General and the King, stuck bearing the heavy repair costs. At the exam results announcement, Min was nervously scanning the list for his name when Dio suddenly appeared, announcing that he ranked first, with Dio and the princess taking second and third. The end. As Min walked on, he spotted Sister Jay guiding new students. The moment she saw her little brother, she dropped everything to rush over and embrace him tightly. No wonder she's haunted by Ken. Thanks to her, Min learned that anyone who tops the entrance exam must deliver the opening speech to all freshmen. Meanwhile, Sylvia paced anxiously at home, mumbling to herself. When Ken returned, she rushed to ask about the exam results. Hearing that her brother won top honors, tears welled up, almost spilling over. But first, it was time for a celebration, a party for 100 guests. At that rate, their stomachs might just give out from overindulgence. At the orientation ceremony, Men arrived to find his parents already seated in the stands for a long time. He only managed a few waves before both his first and second wives appeared. Seeing each other, their faces flushed, truly a gathering of beautiful youths. Sitting down didn't bring peace either. The mischievous kids behind kept whispering. They gossiped about who dared sit alongside the Duke, the lady, and the princess at once. When their names were called, it turned out the young man was the exam's top scorer. But then he mentioned entering through the wrong gate, leaving the old couple speechless with embarrassment. Thankfully, the academy showed mercy and let it slide. But looking at those faces, did it really feel forgiven? To erase class divides, Min declared he'd befriend anyone, no matter their background. Then came an unexpected arrival that no one could handle. The Emperor, ruler of the entire kingdom, didn't hide his anger. He directly confronted his future son-in-law with fiery words, then clapped him on the shoulder while reminding the new students just how sharp things are. Everyone involved couldn't help but burst into laughter. Later, when Min arrived at class, the homeroom teacher appeared just in time to announce major selection. No surprise, Men planned to join the adventure department, but the princess stopped him. He'd need proper noble manners, so he had to study there instead. Luckily, students could enroll in multiple departments, so Min decided to take them all. The blonde planned to study internal affairs to manage the territory with her husband, and the purple-haired girl chose commerce for the same reason. Having two beautiful, sensible lovers like this, who else is luckier than our men? During the first day's break, the three witnessed nobles bullying commoners. One of them was a childhood friend. Min quickly stepped in to stop it. The bully couldn't fight back and threatened to call his powerful father to pressure the family. But Min's resolve was unwavering. He stood firm, ready to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. This was just the beginning of his journey, where friendships, rivalries, and the harsh realities of class would collide in a vivid tapestry of growth and courage. The young noble's mansion. The moment the princess and the duke's daughter appeared, the room fell silent. But saving others came at a cost. Ken found himself kneeling, caught between the two beauties for a private conversation. Just then, a strange voice echoed. It summoned Ken to the library for a meeting. No sooner had he opened the door than he was whisked away to a grand estate, and to his surprise, cup of earth coffee appeared before him. It turned out the man in front was the very first king. Forget everything, let's savor this rare brew. It's been 5 years since he last tasted such a delight. The first king then began to reveal the truths Ken needed to know. He shared how the gods had enlightened Ken about his origins, where he came from, the server he once lived on, and why he was here. Though Ken's face betrayed a bit of confusion, his slow-thinking mind took over, and after more than half an hour of conversation, he finally understood the identity of the man before him, the legendary first king. Granted permission to examine the situation, Ken pulled up his status board. 3 glowing words struck him like lightning: Creator God. The first king laid his cards on the table, admitting this world was crafted by Ken himself. Naturally, it had existed for 3 long years. Hearing this, Ken's heart skipped a beat in disbelief. The reason Ken found himself here was because the creator god of his world had personally reached out to the first king for guidance. But our young hero quickly declined in less than a heartbeat. Understandably so, he was struggling under the weight of his immense power. Seeing Ken's confidence, the king offered a taste of cake, but the moment Ken stood, a sword suddenly pressed against his neck. Curious why he had to be so strong, the first king explained a lurking adversary awaited Ken's challenge. This enemy was a villain from 300 years ago who had sown distrust among all the people, driving them to endless bloodshed. He questioned why he needed to be this strong. The first king explained that there was an adversary waiting for him to confront. Specifically, this was the one who, 300 years ago, caused the people of the world to turn on each other. He simply needed to plant a seed of doubt in everyone's minds, leading to a loss of trust. Thus, fighting became an inevitable outcome. At this point, the king hesitated, then revealed the name of that foe, the dark god Aon. In the battle 3 years ago, Ken and his comrades sacrificed so much to seal him away successfully. However, recently that seal began to show signs of weakening, and unfortunately, once someone becomes a god, they are forbidden from interfering with human affairs. So, even though Ken's family wanted to help, they found themselves powerless. To put it simply, the group of eccentric old men decided to leave everything up to Ken to handle on his own. Before Ken could grasp the full scope of the situation, the god of creation took his hand and transported him to the edge of the island, leaving him with a compass and instructing him to head to the mansion. Only after everything was settled did he start to explain about the history. Meanwhile, in the present world, Ken was barely scraping by, having just stepped into the realm of the average. Leveling up became a priority. Since 1 year in this world equated to just 1 day in the world he originally lived in, he could freely farm monsters and level up, aiming for around level 600 just to hold his own against Aoni, while Ken himself was stuck at level 300. At that moment, Sylvia heard a noise outside the door and rushed out, thinking Ken had returned, only to be met by a group of princesses and young dukes. She was filled with worry, fearing that Ken might have been kidnapped or caught up in some dangerous situation. Princess Maithe remained calm, completely trusting in her future husband. Therefore, she suggested that everyone come inside to sit down. However, the concerns of the servants were not unfounded. Ken was currently struggling to survive in the forest, his frail body even allowing monsters to grip him tightly in their claws. Just when he felt hopeless, thinking there was no way back, a shrill cry pierced the air. Instinctively, driven by his kind-hearted nature, he stood up and moved toward the sound. Upon arrival, he saw a weak creature lying on the ground. Just as he was about to lend a hand to free it, he recalled 2 previous instances where he had saved others. In the end, he used the last of his strength to cast a healing spell. Little did he know that in that fleeting moment, he almost lost himself completely, as Ken was the type of person who always wanted to help those in need. Moments later, he passed out from exhaustion. When he regained consciousness, he found the creature he saved was now fighting, specifically to protect him from the dangers surrounding them. Since the 2 of them were alone now, a unique bond began to form between man and beast. As time passed, both shared their own memories of fierce battles. Eventually, they succeeded in returning to the mansion of the god of creation, taking a full 4 years of braving the elements. Seeing the creature beside him, Ken finally revealed it was Fenrir, a rare divine beast. Since they had grown quite close, they decided to form a pact to journey together. However, training was only just beginning, as the god would directly guide Ken, but first, they had to discuss history. Given Ken's current strength, he was in no position to argue. A1 was even stronger than the god of creation, not to mention the demon king, who was weaker than the first king that Ken had defeated. Ken threw a punch straight at his teacher, but the next moment, he found himself knocked out cold by a powerful blow to his abdomen. When he woke up, he found himself in the teacher's house, accompanied by a stunningly beautiful mentor and a baby dragon, making for an overwhelming experience. As he took his first bite of food, tears streamed down his face. This was the first proper meal he had in a long time. After all, he had spent those 4 years surviving in the forest. Hearing that he would have meals like this every day from now on filled him with boundless happiness. Meanwhile, the 2 young ladies, Khan and Lanok, were scolded for not focusing on baking, while Ken's father had to eat countless onions from his master. No matter how fast Ken tried to speed up, his punches were easily dodged by the Demon King, and he was forced to fall back into a defensive stance, ultimately taking a barrage of blows at incredible speed. But the current situation was already a major improvement. It was known that when he first began training, Ken could barely crawl home. Reflecting back, the Dew family had revealed that Aone was actually the god of the game in Ken's world. To be precise, there had been 7 deities in office before. However, that one, for reasons unknown, used a prophetic word to force all innocent citizens of the world into participating in a death game. As a result, he was directly expelled from the world of the gods. But if he were to return, that cruel game would commence once more. Moreover, the comrades that the god of creation, Dujia, lost in that battle were actually Ken's parents. The 3 of them had been taken to the round table of the gods, where they learned about Aeon's story and were ultimately tasked with soothing the world using a crystal given to them by the god of creation. In that fateful battle, Ken's mother sacrificed herself to save the female bishop by taking an arrow from A1. This enraged Ken's father, causing him to lose control and charge forward, only to be easily dodged by the dark god, who then stabbed him through the chest. However, this also created the opportunity for the Dew family to seal Aone away successfully. Now, in the present, Ken was determined to defeat his master, as there was still so much he needed to protect. Fueled by that motivation, he launched a strike that shattered the Demon King's weapon into pieces, before he pressed the blade against his throat, concluding a training session that had lasted over a year. If this dark force were to rise again, the cruel game of slaughter would replay its nightmare. Moreover, the comrades lost by the creator god Dujia in that ancient battle were none other than Ken's own parents. The 3 were summoned to the gods' round table to hear the tale of one, and ultimately entrusted with a crystal bestowed by the creator god to heal the world. In that fateful battle, Ken's mother sacrificed herself to shield the female cleric from an arrow fired by Aone. Her selfless act enraged Ken's father, who lost control and charged forward recklessly. But the dark god easily dodged aside and pierced Ken's father through the chest. Yet this was all part of the plan, creating the perfect moment for Dujia to embed the sealing stone into Aone's face, finally imprisoning the wicked fiend. Now, Ken stands resolute and determined to defeat his master, for there's still so much he must protect. Fueled by this resolve, he swung his blade, shattering Dozer's sword into fragments. Then pressing his weapon to the master's neck, he ended a grueling year-long training. At the moment Ken returned to the creator god, he found him fallen before 2 tombstones, but swallowed his grief. Dujia's final test was simply a piece of cake, but Ken snatched it swiftly, proving his growth. Before Ken returned to his own world, the master restored him to his original form. After 5 years here, such a change was only natural. This time, Ken took along not just his racing skills, but also the Dragon of Dozer. With only a hurried thank you left behind, Ken swiftly returned amid awe from both masters. They believed Ken would grow even stronger, for the things he protects are truly monumental. The moment he stepped through his door, a crowd of beauties and soldiers awaited, complete with a tray of love-themed cakes. After so long without a bite, Ken devoured them like a bulldozer. Upon returning, he reported to the king about his time with the first king, and brought back the very katana the elder once wielded. There was no denying it now. He also revealed the harrowing journey he endured, from endless battles with forest monsters to falling every moment under Dozer's tutelage. 5 years slipped by in a blink, but no rest awaited him. He was immediately reminded of the urgent mission to advance to rank A. His registration might even be cancelled if his current state persisted. Beyond the rank issue, the guild leader worried deeply about Ken's sister. She'd been holding back her sword training to the limit, while no one was available to spar with. If the siblings reunited now, the explosion would be inevitable. Delays could no longer be tolerated. To avoid losing his registration, Ken accepted a mission to capture a notorious bandit gang. This gang frequently terrorized the road from Gassia to the capital, boasting over 10 members but that posed no problem. No matter how many enemies there were, Ken could handle them all. After all, he wielded the limited black blade. Without hesitation, he teleported to the hotspot and activated flying magic to scout. Soon enough, Ken spotted the bandits in action. Shockingly, the victims were his 2 old masters, and his friend's father and Nina had been injured as well. This mission promised more harm than good. Ken rushed ahead to cast healing magic, and once the wounds healed, he summoned his katana, ready to face battle. When a bandit charged at him, Ken immediately activated his buffs, dodging and knocking the attacker aside. Then, with his katana barely sheathed, he struck another enemy's gut, parried blows while counterattacking, and finally dashed forward with lightning speed, weaving through the fray. Even for Ken, this battle felt unusually tough. He held back against those before him. Hearing Ken was on a guild mission, Nina panicked, realizing Ken just turned 12 and not long past the minimum age. Plus, mission ranks of suppressing bandits usually required at least rank C, so it was a bit risky. Ready for battle, when a foe charged at men, he instantly activated his shield and closed in to knock the basket away. Then, Ken unsheathed his sword and struck another attacker in the gut, blocked a blow, countered, and finally dashed forward with lightning speed, cutting through the line. To Ken, this fight felt strangely difficult as struggled, because he had to hold back against those before him. Hearing that Ken was now an official guild delegate, Nina panicked, realizing Ken had just barely turned 12 this year. Plus, the mission to suppress bandits required at least a C rank, which made her uneasy. But Men cut through her worries by flashing his A rank certificate, skipping over B and C ranks straight to A. Monsters are monsters, no matter what. Now, what should they do with the defeated bandits? Without hesitation, Ken locked them all in a cage and dragged them across the kingdom, enduring mockery and forced to serve time behind bars. By the time they reached the shop, the owner and a friend were waiting to greet them, but Ken refused to claim any credit. Instead, Min insisted he was just on a mission, passing by chance. From the bottom of his heart, Weimar truly admired his friend, juggling school, guild duties, and the burdens of a nobleman. Upon hearing this, the redhead was startled. Free speech was no longer an option. They'd have to change how they addressed one another. But Ken said he didn't need that, sticking with the teacher-student form as before. Of course, seeing a student grow up deserves praise from the teacher. Still, Ken felt a bit shy and decided to turn back to the inn. Nina and Men had errands nearby and decided to follow, quickly presenting identification papers to the shop manager. Just as the mood lifted, they turned around to find several older men looking utterly defeated. Still, the boy felt a bit shy and decided to backtrack on his stance. Nina and M, Lay, busy with their own errands nearby, chose to chase after him relentlessly, quickly presenting their ID cards to the shop manager. Just when the mood was light and bright, turning back, they saw their uncle's faces fall completely. In that instant, when his small hand lightly touched, the red-headed man immediately recognized the familiar chain of memories. The group instinctively took a step back. If that fiery ice brother showed up, they would definitely have to retreat, as staying meant facing a beating for sure. Everything seemed normal except for one detail. Sea Lord was Nina's older brother. Now the fiery ice brother recalled the past stories his sister often told, back when she used to tutor the noble's son. He was about to shift the conversation to lighten the mood when unexpectedly his wife poked him in the face with a stick. But since it was a happy occasion, today was an exception. Hearing that his sister revealed Ken had become a C-ranked adventurer, Sea Lord felt a bit surprised but had already suspected it. After all, he was the one who matched Ken's strength when going all out. Outside of that, the fiery ice brother was known for climbing to rank A solely through his swordsmanship, not even needing any magic. With that in mind, it was clear how formidable he wielded his sword. Now Ken wasn't just the son of the noble Count Nam I, but had also been granted the title of Baron, prompting the redhead to bow and apologize profusely for his earlier rudeness. But this young man had always been strong. Even as a little kid, he had fearlessly taken down a full Zagon by himself. That kind of power was extraordinary. Not only that, he had used monster materials to craft 2 ultra-rare bags. Seeing this, Sea Lord's wife turned red with embarrassment and requested to be gifted one for herself. Truth be told, she was a bit tipsy and acted that way, as she usually didn't allow her husband to drink too much. Min quickly declared he needed to return home to prepare for tomorrow's class. While feeling regretful for not being able to help the young boy, the guild called for help. An adventurer scheduled for class tomorrow had been injured, so they urgently needed members, which suited these kids perfectly. The next morning, upon arriving at school, Ken found himself struggling because he was banned from using magic. The reason was that the surrounding barrier couldn't withstand it. When it came time for the advanced swordsmanship class, the teacher invited Sea Lord's group in. Initially, he only intended to summon 1 C-rank student, but surprised, they ended up with 2 A ranks and 2 B ranks. First up was the adventurer card draw. If he pulled out the yellow card, he would surely become the center of attention, so Ken adamantly claimed he had forgotten it at home. However, the situation wasn't looking much better. With so many students in the swordsmanship class, it would take a long time for Ken's turn to come up. As for magic, he was prohibited from using it, so he could only stand in a corner waiting. The group of adventurers was intentionally showing off their abilities to let the other students see their strength. Next, they aimed for Ken to match or even outshine all 4 of them. The result would make him the center of attention from all the students, ending the solitude he had endured for so long. Little did they know, they got so carried away that they forgot about the class time. When the swords clashed together, the bell rang, signaling the end of the lesson. Then came the shocking announcement that the adventurer department would no longer call in special instructors due to the enormous repair costs from the fire magic incident at the start of the year. Just like that, their planned 4-person scheme was dashed completely. Left with no choice, that night, Ken could only appear in the monster forest, continuously shooting fireballs to vent his frustrations. He even went as far as to create a rain of magma, unleashing devastating power that sent columns of fire shooting into the sky. The guards mistook it for a monster surge and quickly reported it, but when the old man arrived, all he found was this handkerchief left behind. The next day, Ken was summoned by the king to discuss a serious issue. Specifically, there were reports that the Demon Lord was returning to invade the world, all stemming from the massive disturbance in the monster forest last night. He intended to see if the divine entities had revealed anything, but unexpectedly Ken declared that further investigation wasn't necessary. After asking a few questions, they understood the root of the situation. As for Aeon-E, he had discovered the seal was loosening and was thrilled. Even though he had only liberated a portion of his body, he was determined to make a significant impact this time, even taunting the old men to watch him act. Of course, putting all things aside, after returning home, Ken found himself on the receiving end of a scolding. Naturally, having a son who was both extremely powerful yet equally destructive must be quite a headache for any parent. Today, the whole class had a summoning magic lesson. They thought for sure they would be sent outside to study on their own. Unexpectedly, since it was a non-offensive magic lesson, the ban was lifted for 1 day of freedom. Additionally, the teacher in charge, Guzat, who usually served as the royal wizard, had come specifically to guide the young boys' class. According to the shared knowledge, summoning magic was divided into 2 types. One involved forming a pact with a compatible monster beforehand, while the other called forth monsters directly from a magic circle. Now, Ken understood that Haku and Jin were the first type of contract pets, but putting that aside, Guzat would personally guide the students in summoning monsters today. The only important note was that if the 2 sides didn't like each other, they wouldn't succeed in cohabiting. For example, this young boy brought a fierce beast with incredible battle power, but due to insufficient magical energy, they could only part ways. After waiting for a long time, it was finally Ken's turn. He quickly placed the paper, with the summoning circle drawn on the ground, and then poured his magical energy into the circle. At that moment, memories of pain flooded back, and he wondered what it would be like if something terrifying appeared. The teacher reassured him to stay calm. If he couldn't form a pact, the monster wouldn't stay anyway. But just as he finished speaking, a massive surge of magical energy shot through the sky. Despite Guzat desperately shouting for him to stop, memories of pain surged within him, and he wondered what it would be like if something truly terrifying existed. The guiding teacher reassured him, saying not to worry. If a contract couldn't be formed, the monster wouldn't stick around. But just as those words left his mouth, a massive pillar of magical energy pierced the sky, ignoring Guat's desperate cries. But it was too late now. Luckily, he was alert enough to cut off the energy source. At that moment, in the center of the magical circle below, a young man with striking white hair and horns appeared, looking incredibly cool. After all, he was a demon lord. Upon hearing this, Min cast a light spell to shield everyone's eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, the demon lord activated his ability to see through the status board and advanced towards the summoner. Just when it seemed they would clash, Ken drew his sword in a flash, ready to engage in battle. To his surprise, the demon lord knelt and pledged his loyalty as a servant of the divine. At this point, summoning the spirit of the nation would be fine too. Sending an army of demon creatures would solve the issue. But Ken quickly rejected that notion, asserting he had no need for demon power at all. The demon lord understood and introduced himself as Sito, forming a contract with Ken, stating that if he ever needed anything, he could call on him, willing to dive into the flames of hell if necessary. The teacher quickly inquired about the demon lord's self-introduction, but Ken interrupted, saying they wouldn't establish a noble title. He simply had to accept it and do as he pleased. They swiftly moved to the local Adventurers Guild headquarters, but ran into a woman who looked down on children until he showed his golden card. Thankfully, Judy appeared just in time, otherwise they might have been stuck forever. Upon hearing this, the teacher nodded in agreement. Yet, just a moment later, they all found themselves gathered in the king's office. What was there to hide now? The instant Ken claimed to have summoned a demon king, the mouths of those present fell open in disbelief. And, if a pact was indeed struck, oh boy, it would be chaos. While the youth remained calm, the rest were gripped by the fear of a demon king obliterating the capital. The only unfortunate soul in this situation was their teacher, Guzat. He questioned how much magic power Ken possessed to have summoned a demon king to the human realm. The king also wondered aloud and suggested they check. Of course, he had previously warned the teacher not to disclose anything outside, or they would face the consequences. As the results flashed on the screen, the colossal letters A and the number 8 horizontally were shocking enough to bring Guzat to his knees. The king struggled to maintain his composure, confirming a few details before deciding to hold a ceremony to grant a title of nobility in a few days. If all went well, he would also bestow land and announce a marriage pact. However, before he could even celebrate at home, news arrived that the territory ruled by his father was in jeopardy, facing signs of an outbreak. According to the information from his brother, Jean, the number of adventurers attacked by monsters had significantly risen over the past 2 months. Despite continuously assigning high-level missions to investigate, the situation showed no improvement. With monsters roaming increasingly and viciously, it invoked memories of outbreaks from years past. Therefore, Jin allied with adventurer guilds from various cities, but with no discoveries made, he couldn't draw any conclusions. The moment he heard his younger brother plan to investigate, Jin immediately opposed it. Why would he put the boy in danger? But seeing the adventurer card and the Zeddon specimen in the Baron's estate, he had no choice but to let him do as he wished. Quickly, they moved to the local adventurer guild's headquarters, but they ran into a disdainful woman who looked down on children until Ken presented his gold card. Fortunately, Judy showed up just in time, otherwise they might have been stuck forever. At that moment, Lei and Nina also made a sudden appearance. They had just returned from the forest, and it was painfully evident that all the monsters had grown fiercer and stronger. Judy, unable to bear the responsibility, tried to stop Ken. He asserted his strength. Well, he had the blue-haired guy and his red-haired friend with him, albeit slightly odd and not entirely human. At that moment, Emily and Nina unexpectedly showed up. They had just returned from the forest, and the only noticeable thing was that all the monsters were much fiercer and stronger. Judy couldn't handle the responsibility, so she tried to stop Ken. He insisted he was very strong. Well, that's true, but he also had his companions, although a bit odd and not human. After summoning Haku and Jin to the surface, the three charged deep inside to investigate. Although no monster posed a threat, Ken always felt someone was watching. Deciding to consult some knowledgeable youths about the monsters, Ken summoned Seto, who immediately started shouting upon arrival but quickly calmed when he saw Ken. The Demon Lord himself felt something odd. It seemed a powerful presence resided here. While Seto's homeland boasted many monsters, the sheer number in this forest was unusual. After asking for permission, Seto called Damatia, a retired four-heavenly king, but his abilities remained top-notch, quickly creating a massive magical pit. Moreover, despite his homeland being filled with monsters, the sheer number in this forest is alarming. After seeking permission from the Lord, Seto summons Damatia, a retired four-heavenly king, whose abilities are still top-notch. He quickly conjures a dark abyss of magic beneath the ground, sending billions of tiny insects swarming in every direction, forcing the earth dragons to surface. Seeing this, Mian spins 360 degrees and swiftly decapitates one in the blink of an eye. Following that, he and his pets make quick work of the rest, leaving the aftermath to Seto and his subordinates, while he heads back to the base with the spoils. Now, Dematia understands. If Ken truly becomes his enemy, both of them would meet their demise in an instant. But enough of that, the mission is more important. With that, they continue to probe deeper and successfully approach the hotspot. An icy chill runs down their spines as they face a swarm of monsters resembling a tide of insects, showcasing their overwhelming numbers. But with just one command, they all charge madly toward the town. Seto quickly teleports back to report the situation. After bidding everyone farewell, Ken and his subordinates hastily set off. At that moment, the Holy Swordmaster also arrives, and Mian asks her to help protect the town while he presses forward. The instant he unleashes flames toward the horde, A1A, recognizing the lineage tied to the elders, begins to laugh with satisfaction and prepares for battle, signaling the onset of an epic clash. Xiongfeng takes his position on the front lines. Seto suggests moving towards the ringleader, while the Demon Lord decides to summon more minions to keep fighting. The forest may suffer destruction, but at this point, what does it matter? Back in the town, under the guidance of Ken's family, countless civilians are still fleeing in panic. According to Mule's senses, the monsters are extremely aggressive. Whenever their intensity wanes even slightly, it immediately surges back. Though Ken is indeed powerful, who knows how many monsters lurk in the forest? Therefore, Nina rushes ahead to the hotspot, and naturally both she and her fiery crew follow suit. They are not just confident in their abilities, they are ready to fight to the death if necessary. On Seto's side, he doesn't overthink it and immediately summons the current four heavenly kings. Initially, they seem skeptical. Why would the Demon Lord help humanity? But when they see the legendary Demon General Dematia, they calm down and listen carefully. Specifically, their opponent is a demigod with the title of the Apostle of the Gods, who has even signed a pact with the King of the Insect. There's no other choice left. They must fly and drop nuclear bombs on the ground, moving so fast that they create massive gashes. Seeing the writhing creatures beneath, Ken feels his heart ablaze with urgency. He continuously unleashes fire, generating whirlwinds of destruction. Just then, a black flame suddenly hurtles toward him, but Min manages to cast Inferno in defense. As the dust settles, a Black the Dragon slowly emerges, accompanied by an annoyingly smug voice. He repeatedly refers to Min as a pet of the elders, claiming he is the only one bold enough to utter such words. Who else could it be but the game spirit, Aone? Although he has only regained a fraction of his body and power, he confidently declares his intentions, eager to see if humans can be devoured by monsters. After finishing his speech, one gathers purple energy in his throat and then unleashes it upon the monsters with delight, seeing himself as the strongest being. Nina's group arrives just in time, and they're immediately struck by the sight of superheroes flying about, shooting lightning and fire across the sky. Yet, it doesn't take long for them to realize that all these figures are friends Ken summoned. Now isn't the time for reflection or awe, as the monsters quickly swarm toward them, forcing them into a chaotic battle. As soon as one spots M, he recalls the group that once sealed him away, causing him a moment of hesitation. Gathering black magic in his throat, he finally releases it, straight towards Ken. Naturally, there's no option but to dodge. Understanding the monsters, Ken realizes that once Aone's magic touches them, they'll be overwhelmed. With the additional black fire spinning at him, Ken has to retreat significantly just to evade everything. He counters with a fiery red vortex, but the problem is that Aone feels no pain. Just as Ken is about to pour more magic into his attack, the game spirit doesn't allow Mien any respite, continuously assaulting him. While Ken tries to gain distance, Aone relentlessly follows, discharging attacks. With no other choice left, Ken calls upon Haku and Jin to hold him back. The two manage to slow Aone for a moment, dodging the incoming black fire. However, this only infuriates the game spirit further. He swirls around and sweeps his tail, sending everyone crashing into the mountainside. Both beasts are pulled into danger, facing a massive energy ball. Meanwhile, Nina's group isn't faring well either. Mule doesn't even have enough magic left to continue fighting, and the two redhead siblings are struggling to hold on every second. But they refuse to flee. It leads to a scene where one is overwhelmed by a beetle, while the other must brace for an attack from a bear, though they still have hope of returning. Just at the moment when everything hangs in the balance, 3 steel arrows suddenly appear from afar. They pierce through the air and take down the bear. It turns out to be the Holy Swordmaster. She swiftly flies over to finish off the beetle threatening Nina. After receiving news that the defenses in town hold firm, the team's spirits are instantly lifted. It's time to kick off round 2. Without much thought, as monsters quickly surged towards the group, they had to leap straight into a wild battle. Aeon, upon seeing M, instantly recalled the group that sealed him away before, causing him to hesitate. Thus, he gathered dark magic in his throat and unleashed it directly at Ken. Of course, Ken had no choice but to dodge. The sight of the monsters was enough to understand. His magic rolled over, causing them to crash and roll helplessly. With an additional swirling black flame, Ken had to retreat significantly to dodge it. He retaliated with a fiery spiral attack, but the problem was, his opponent didn't seem to feel any pain. A furious strike unleashed, a blazing red whirlwind of fire, yet the opponent seemed untouched, unfazed by any pain. Ready to pour in more magic power, but the primal spirit wouldn't allow any distractions. Instead, it launched relentless attacks, mocking Ken's strength as weak. Ken had to retreat swiftly, stretching the distance. Meanwhile, the enemy kept weaving through the stars to fire shots. Cornered, Ken called out to Haku and Jin for backup. Those two prodigies brilliantly slowed the foe's pace, dodging the advancing black sparks with deft grace. But this move only enraged the primal spirit of the game to a dangerous fury. It spun with a whip-like tail, smashing everything against the mountain walls. The two beasts were dragged into peril, about to face a colossal orb of destruction. On Nina's side, things were grim too. Lei was drained of magic power, unable to keep fighting, and the two fiery-haired brothers struggled desperately to hold the line. Despite the odds, they refused to run. The scene unfolded, one side swarmed by beetle larvae, the others bracing against the bear's assault. Was there any hope of returning alive? Just as the weight of fate hung by a thread, 3 steel arrows suddenly appeared from afar. They pierced through the bear's chest, bringing it down. It was the work of the Holy Sword wielder. She quickly swooped in and finished off the beetle on Nina's side. Hearing that the town's defenses were holding strong, the team's spirits soared, ready to dive headfirst into the next round. Seeing Pep suffer in agony, Ken rushed over and summoned a shield to block the attacks, buying precious moments. Words from the Demon Lord's mouth ignited a fire in Ken's heart. All he wanted was to protect everyone's smiles. As he spoke, a radiant golden light burst from his body, startling Aeon with its dangerous aura. Aeon unleashed every ounce of his power to counter it. When these two titanic energies clashed, a brilliant pillar of light pierced the sky. But just as the battle reached its peak, the pets swarmed in to bite at his legs. Zio and the legendary 4 heavenly kings of the demon tribe appeared, all amazed by Ken's overwhelming power. Amid fierce battle under the open sky, the pets swooped in to bite at their feet. Zio and the legendary 4 heavenly kings of the demon clan also appeared. They all agreed Ken's power was beyond monstrous. Such destructive force made terrifying feel like an understatement. Even the black dragon A1 vanished, probably reduced to fine dust. Everything seemed norm except, instead of praise from Tan Duong, Ken was summoned and scolded by the king. Understandably, the entire nation was shaken by the towering pillar of light, and citizens bowed, seeing it as divine. It turned out the young man had unleashed imperial-level magic in combat, and even summoned the Demon King for aid. The king seriously wanted to resign. His headaches were endless. The next morning, before the country's elite, Ken was officially titled Viscount of Jinle, though it seemed far from a blessing. The Adventurer Guild held the real power there, making nobles insignificant. Up to now, countless players assigned to this position had stumbled, but Ken was different. He arrived, and immediately scared off guards with his golden authority card. Even the special welcome party was no obstacle. Ken shattered the arena outright, leaving other adventurers in the dust. Beyond that, after this chaos, after witnessing the cruel treatment of the weak, Ken's fury erupted. He smashed every adventurer in sight. The guards caught him, dragging him straight to the dungeon. Upon release, he crossed paths with the Demon King himself, albeit looking a bit shabby. Caught cheating by his wife, Ken had to run to the god's apostle for help. Even then, the apostle was harshly scolded by his master for flaunting his beautiful wife. Meanwhile, a chorus of tiny ladies relentlessly criticized men for being all talk and no action. Those shameless rakes deserved to be sleeping on the streets. Even sitting in the middle of the room made you cringe. The relief of finally speaking one's truth was palpable. The Demon King's wife stepped forward to warn Ken. If he caused their suffering, he'd bear the consequences. Even the god's apostle was but a mosquito in this realm. Back to reality. Reports said Ken stormed into the territory and scolded the entire guild for their outrageous taxes. Anyone who dared oppose faced grim knights. Ken personally led the charge, taking down each offender. In the end, he built a colossal palace that outshone any emperor's. Yet the emperor could do nothing but helplessly shout the sun in, law's name in despair.